Hello, everyone. I'm really happy to have our guest, Chris Hannebeck from Truckle, today with us. And I'm sure that he'll present very interesting insights and suggestions on how to improve the supply chain. Yeah, I'm really happy to have you here, Chris. So go ahead, tell us more about yourself and about the general topic.
All right, thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen with you here. Okay, can you see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay, great. So first of all, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. It's a lot of fun. What I would like to talk about today is a fundamental shift that we see in supply chain management. And when you think about it, for the last 50 years, 60 years, we've always, whenever we look at software, everybody's placed an emphasis on planning systems because the data, quite frankly, was available, and the data was fungible. You could create sales orders and purchase orders and movements of materials in your facility, things like that. What has been vastly neglected at the same time were things that were out of our control, like what happens to a truck barreling down the road. When are your things picked up? When are they delivered? And things like that. About 20 years ago, we've seen the emergence of real-time or visibility type systems, track and trace applications, GPS systems that basically try to rectify that. And what they've done for the most part is put a dot on a map and show you where your truck is. And with that, the theory goes that you can infer what happened to your loads, what happened to your, to the goods that are moving outside of your four walls. Now, today, we're finally moving into an era where people are starting to actually take advantage of that, of that visibility. It's enabled by technology, 5G and wireless. It's enabled by certainly smartphones. Here in the United States, well over 95% of all drivers have smartphones today, things like that. And so we are seeing a paradigm shift right now, and that's what I want to talk about. My background is in supply chain. I've got 27 or so years in supply chain management, spent about a decade in management consulting, a decade in technology startups, and the rest as an operator running actual supply chains. And I've also taught supply chain management to MBAs and undergrads for 2 decades. So fundamentally, I probably know enough to be dangerous. So what I'd like to do is, first of all, start with the current situation and describe a little bit where we see problems today and why we see a paradigm shift approaching. First of all, here are a couple of testimonials. These are actually and deliberately a few years old. The head of supply chain in North America here for Panasonic. We are effectively outsourcing a most important touch point with the customer to someone else, talking about transportation. Gartner, a famous industry analyst, organizations are increasingly demanding real-time visibility across networks, not just within their four walls. And then lastly, Convoy, which is and Janelle Stewart, which is a very innovative load matching platform. No way to collect information that may be on a GPS type unit in a scalable fashion. The industry is just too fragmented. So basically what we see here is it's really important to know where your stuff is at the same time. People want to have this visibility, and a lot of times people are also resigned to, okay, this is going to be really hard, if not impossible. And what we see is that everyone in the supply chain is isolated, and we often use the analogy of throwing information or throwing a process over the wall. It's when you think about it, let's say we have a buyer, somebody who manufactures manufactures goods, plastics, for example, and they now purchase chemicals for their manufacturing process. They purchase 30 tons of sulfites that come in a tanker truck, and they call a manufacturer. Basically tell the manufacturer what they need. They need it by Wednesday of next week, and then they absolve themselves of any responsibility. If anything happens, I'll just pick up the phone, call the manufacturer, and scream. Now, the manufacturer does exactly the same thing. They usually work with a third-party logistics provider, and they call the 3PL and say, hey guys, you got to pick up the sulfites on Monday over here. You got to have them at the customer side on Wednesday over there at this time. And they absolve themselves. They're not responsible any longer. They've just thrown it over the wall as well to the next party, right? And so every party does it. The 3PL negotiates with 2 or 3 brokers. These brokers now take on the responsibility. They usually work with dispatchers. So they basically absolve themselves and say, I just hand it to the dispatcher. The dispatcher works with drivers. Finally, the drivers get the case. And now we all basically have given up control of the process entirely, right? Everybody's just waiting for something to happen so they can pick up the phone and scream at someone else. That's fundamentally, I mean, it's an exaggeration, of course, but that's fundamentally what it is, right? And so people build a wall, and then, as you see here in the photo, then they have problems looking over it. Then they want to see what's going on the other side. That's quite ironic. In every way you look at it, organizations are siloed, right? What we've just seen is that everybody lobs the responsibility and the data over to anybody else, and everybody has information systems that work within their 4 walls, but not outside of them. And that makes it very, very difficult. So you now have a situation where when you need something, you're not going to get it through your ERP or your TMS or your WMS. You're basically relegated to now sending an email saying, hey, can you send me the bill of lading? Hey, I need your rate confirmation. Hey, I need a commercial invoice, a manifest, standard operating procedures, special handling instructions, hazmat documentation, import-export papers, you name it, right? All of that stuff now has to be requested, and not just once, but multiple times, right? The 3PL requested from the manufacturer, so does the recipient. Now the broker requested from the 3PL, the dispatcher from the broker, and the driver from the dispatcher. And every single time you have these hops, and it's immensely inefficient. When you look at a case, this was an actual case study, a material sciences company that ships about 600 loads of chemicals every day. In their world, 120 loads every day are late. 120 times every day, a recipient of freight calls this company. Then this company obviously has to work with a 3PL who works with a broker, and so on and so forth. So you have, and it's not just one conversation. The recipient, obviously, we found, looking into this, we found at the recipient, it's not just, somebody saying, hey, I need to call the shipper, I need to call the manufacturer and get this. No, it was the manufacturing, the director of manufacturing, or the VP of manufacturing, eventually is informed by somebody on the shop floor, hey, we're going to run out of sulfites in an hour. Have you seen that truck? No. Go and call blah, blah, blah. Here we had a conversation, right? That just took place. Now, that person goes and calls procurement, or maybe calls the warehouse, right? The warehouse then says, no, I haven't seen that truck. You need to talk to procurement, right? And on and on and on. You see what's going on here, right? In one instance, just with a recipient of freight, we've already seen multiple conversations, probably around 10 minutes worth of conversations. Then it hops on to the manufacturer. And there, of course, the procurement people in the customer side, they will call somebody in sales on the manufacturer side. The salespeople obviously aren't tracking this stuff, so they have to now talk to supply chain, to procurement, to who did we give this to? Why are they not on time? Where are they? Until somebody in supply chain or in procurement finally calls the 3PL and says, "Oh my God, guys, what's going on? Where's my stuff?" You get the drift, right? We lose trillions of dollars every year because of this. And this is just one case of many. We're not even talking about losing something or damages or freight being abandoned or anything like the accidents. We're just talking about a very simple scenario where a driver is late. So as you can see, these are very, very very costly and very cumbersome problems, and that's what we see today, and that's where we see changes today. The industry now is realizing this is happening, of course, and is moving into collaborative apps. Today, if you're an operator, if you book and route truckloads, say at a third-party logistics provider, at a broker, maybe even at a manufacturer, definitely at a transportation company, you basically experience Groundhog Day every day. You come into the office thinking it's going to be fine, then you see problem after problem after problem after problem, until you finally leave, you have a couple of beers, you go to sleep, and then the same thing repeats itself, right? And a lot of times it's about working smarter, not working harder, right? It's in one instance, somebody told me, well, we're really the best company in solving problems, and obviously that's great, right? And there's merit in that claim, obviously. But my point here is, you really want to be the best company in the world that doesn't have problems, right? That avoids them. Now, that's not possible, and obviously also, very arrogant comment on my part. But you get the principle of it, right? I'm not saying that's that statement is stupid, but rather that it is necessary to move in a different direction with your aspirations. That's all I'm saying. Okay, today in the United States, and we've corroborated this in other locations as well, about 1 in every 3 truckloads, 35%, have issues. They're called exceptions. You're chasing documents, the drivers are late, there's something happens with the freight in between, something might happen on the shipping or the receiving end, there may be damages, losses of freight. The cost of data gaps, according to FreightWave's prominent industry publication, is roughly $3 trillion annually, and businesses lose up to 35% or 30% of their profitability because of it. This is a very big problem. At the same time, right, we've had GPS systems for 20 years, and they're not solving these problems, and in all fairness, they weren't, entirely designed to solve these issues. And we had to fix a couple of things before we can actually solve these problems. GPS systems alone will not help you. You need collaboration, you need, trustless systems and things like that, as we will see. So when we talk about supply chain visibility, what I hope has come across so far is that it has dramatically changed over the last over the last 2 decades. Visibility actually doesn't mean that we put a dot on a map. It doesn't even mean that we look at everything all the time, right? If I'm sitting in a warehouse and I know I can see my stuff, I don't need to be reminded that my stuff is there all the time, right? I'm here. What I really want with visibility is a system that looks over the entirety of my material flows and then alerts when something goes wrong. I don't have to manage the rule, so to speak. I don't have to manage, okay, something's here, something's here, something's here. I have to manage when something disappears. I have to manage when something breaks. I have to manage when a truck is delayed, when a truck breaks down, when freight is removed 200 miles from the destination. Those are the situations that I need to actively manage. But it doesn't mean that I have to see everything, that I have to look at everything, and certainly not that I have to, kind of touch everything. So that's really important to keep in mind when we talk about supply chain visibility. It is often a misnomer. It denotes the ability to look at an entire supply chain. At the same time, for me as an operator, as somebody who uses the information, I don't need to see the entire supply chain all the time. In fact, I don't want to. In fact, I don't want to hear about it at all until something goes wrong. That requires my attention, and now I'm starting to manage it, but nothing else. Today, we see a lot of situations, a lot of companies that are advanced companies that actually manage the entire process. They treat every single transaction as if it were an exception. And that is a big mistake, simply from the perspective that it costs an enormous amount of money. We call that nuisance cost in business cases. But with that, let's turn to, how do we solve this? How do we actually address these problems? I've told you there's lots of exceptions. I've told you that nobody's collaborating, everybody's living in silos, and that the processes are hugely inefficient, costing trillions of dollars. So the question obviously is, well, that's great, but what do we do about it? So one of the things that we look at when we see that the industry is changing, and when obviously industry partners such as OmniOpti and Truckle are driving these changes. What we look at is really, are a couple of factors. And here, when we look at the problems, we can really summarize them into 4 problems that you need to solve. Number one, everyone in the supply chain is siloed, works off of partial data, and there's a lot of redundant data input. Number 2, the people that do the actual work are often the least motivated, the truck drivers and the warehouse workers, etc. Right? 80% of everything that happens during supply chain executions happens with people who actually move stuff. Right? It's not the planners, it's not the thinkers that do stuff. It's it's the drivers. The drivers are often in a hockey goalie situation. They play a perfect game for 59 minutes. They make a tiny mistake, 20,000 people jump out of their seats and scream profanities. That's the life of a driver. So drivers actually, are often seen as an appendix to the transaction. Go tell this guy to drive over here and don't be late, right? It's very dismissive in many ways, right? And what we're trying to, or what we have to figure out, what we have to do is we have to elevate drivers to the level of everybody else, right? They're not an appendix. They are the most important part to every transaction, simply because your fate is in their hands. Whether it's millions of dollars of electronics, or whether it's 30 tons of sulfides, or whether it's 40 live cattle, they are in your hands, or in their hands. And so it is really, really important to bring drivers into the fold, to make them part of the family, so to speak. Thirdly, the parties that have the highest interest in success, the recipient, the shipper, and the 3PL, have no control whatsoever, as I outlined early on. And then lastly, there just isn't enough data coming back from the road. When you put a dot on a map, it doesn't solve any real world problems. In fact, it can make things a lot worse. You see that the truck is 24 miles from its destination. That means trucks drive 40.3 miles on average per hour. That's at least the US average. So you'd be forgiven for deducting that the truck is going to be there in roughly 35 to 40 minutes. However, we don't know enough, right? We don't know if the driver is sitting there munching on a hot dog, whether, he's broken down, whether this is his break and he actually by law needs to spend the next 3 hours immobile. So there are so many different factors. We don't know if he's running into traffic. We don't know if this traffic, if he is still going 40 miles an hour, which we actually get from a GPS system, but we don't know if he's hitting traffic and so on and so forth. So there are so many different things that have to come together that it's often difficult. And, speaking about elevating drivers and operators into an equal role, what we also need to consider is giving them the ability to capture a lot more data. And, go through checklists, take photos, get signatures, proof of delivery, proof of pickup, use software in the process, use intelligence in the process. And that's fundamentally what we need to solve for. One thing that is really, really important is that we move away from being chased by exceptions. No more Groundhog Days. Today we have a situation where we think everything is okay until somebody calls and says it's not, and then everybody's in a frenzy, right? And in supply chain, you have this famous saying: "You're only as good as your last load." You can have made 1,000 great deliveries, you make one bad one, and everybody hates you. You're the worst person on the planet. I'm exaggerating here, but these are actual sentiments that you hear. So what we really need to do is we need to also put people in a position where they can anticipate problems, where they can prevent problems before they happen as opposed to after. And that's never been more important than now. As we automate, also as supply chains become faster and faster. One thing that can help is obviously when you connect information systems. The problem with that is you usually connect them through application programming interfaces or through electronic data interchange. Both of those have issues. APIs are time-consuming, they're very, very expensive, and usually, you talk about weeks, if not months, of project work. At the same time, EDI is a technology that's really quite old. It stems from the 1980s and 90s, so it's not really an up-to-date technology, and it's very constrained in that it is a data standard, and you can only transmit data that fits into the standard, which may or may not be conducive for you today. So at Truckle, for example, we have invented a different approach, which we call collaborative dashboards. Basically, the idea is that you can share a dashboard without the need for APIs and EDI, simply by inviting other parties to a transaction. And so, your manufacturer of chemicals issues a sales order. That sales order would actually, we use an API, of course, to get that in order to avoid data input, especially 600 times a day. But that sales order now comes onto a shed or onto a dashboard, a Truckle dashboard, and then Truckle actually invites the recipient of the freight to the dashboard if the manufacturer wants that. Truckle then can also invite the third-party logistics provider to the dashboard. Now we've daisy-chained them. So now everyone sees the same information. The broker, the 3PL negotiates with 3 brokers to settle on a broker. They now invite the broker to the transaction. For these invitations, all you need is an email or a phone number. It's as simple as that. And now we daisy chain all these dashboards together until somebody invites a driver who uses Truckle on a mobile application for Android or iOS. Now, every time somebody adds a document, somebody adds data, it ripples through and everybody sees it. When the driver delivers the load, it ripples through, everybody sees it within seconds. The driver takes photos at the pickup point. Everybody sees there's 18 pallets, they're strapped in, there's nothing is double loaded, double stacked. Everybody can see that within seconds of the driver taking that photo. So it's immensely powerful. We give the drivers tools that they use to better deal with the requirements in place. At the same time, obviously the need for phone calls, emails, conversations, screaming, all that goes away because everybody has these same information on their hands. It doesn't make sense for me to call another party because they only have the same information I have. So why would I do that? And that makes it extremely powerful. Obviously, as mentioned, the way it works is we pull a process, a transaction, a transport load out of an ERP or TMS system, put it onto the dashboard. Everybody together curates the transaction. You can obviously also keep documents confidential. Rate confirmations are not universally shared, but rather between two parties, and so on and so forth. And then the driver collects information, and at the end of it, we write the information on the blockchain. We do that because we want to enhance trust, and we also want to foster responsibility. Fundamentally, when you know that something is documented on an immutable ledger, you're just going to behave a little better, and, which is a placebo effect, of course. But also, in case of disputes, in case there's ever, arguments, hey, you were supposed to ship 14 pellets, I only got 12, et cetera, you have an ironclad documentation of what actually happens. And that's immensely valuable. Now, mobile applications are changing greatly. Obviously, it's more than just putting dots on a map, although that is still valuable. The two examples we see here, in the upper one, the driver took a lunch break. In the lower one, the driver actually, took a detour that was far longer, however, also a lot faster in order to meet a delivery window, right? And it's that kind of intelligence that you really need. But you also, you want, and again, it's not about seeing these dots, seeing where the drivers are. It's about getting alerts and notifications when something goes wrong. It doesn't matter where the driver is. If they deliver on time and everything is fine, who cares where they are? It's obviously also about, collecting photos, scanning documents, signatures, checklists, and as well as behind the scenes data capture. I need to be able to tell you that when the driver checked in for delivery and then took photos of the freight, but he also was 200 miles from the delivery location. That is obviously difficult, and we obviously need to, alert you immediately so that you can contact law enforcement. Obviously, in last mile and in route optimization, where we work with OmniOpti, this is just as important. Imagine a situation where you have hundreds of last mile deliveries. What we can now do is we can pull them from the ERP system into OmniOpti's optimizer. In the optimizer now, OmniOpti takes multiple variables, multiple conditions, multiple considerations, constraints, and requirements into consideration to then come up with routes, let's say in 15 or 20 different geographical areas. And, we can then, of course, put them onto different dashboards. Each distribution center across, a geographic area has its own dashboard. They see their transactions. The company sees all transactions. The drivers are automatically invited. We can actually cut a lot of the process of optimizing routes simply by having shared dashboards and simply by having, of course, the optimization capability that OmniOpti offers. Likewise, we've seen cases where we've integrated RFID into the solution here. In this case, a truck picks up commodities, and usually what happens is the truck drives up to a scale at the supplier location, their weight empty, the so-called tare weight. Then they drive off, they get loaded, they come around and they weigh again, which is now the gross weight. And then you subtract the tare weight from the gross weight to give you the weight of the load. It's a very simple process, but it is a very labor-intense process today. The driver goes onto the scale, they hop out of the cab, they run around to the scale, they jot the tare weight on a piece of paper. A scale attendant at the supplier location signs off on that. The driver goes back, gets into the cab, drives, gets loaded, and the process repeats. At the end of the day, hundreds of these drivers come back to the office and hand stacks of paper to a clerk, who then has to manually transcribe all these stacks of paper into bills of ladings, into invoices, etc. What we can do just by using an RFID solution is we can put an RFID portal next to the scale. The driver, and we put 4 RFID tags or 8 RFID tags on the truck. The truck drives up to the scale. We automatically read it. We use an RS-232 or similar interface to connect to the scale. We read the truck weight. We have the truck identity. We send that to the truckle backend. the driver never gets out. There is no scale attendant necessary. The driver gets loaded, comes back around, and within less than 60 seconds, Truckle now generates the bill of lading and the invoice automatically. You know, we've today that takes 7 to 11 weeks in one case, right? We've simply, what we've done now is we've reduced the process of generating these documents from 7 to 11 weeks down to less than 60 seconds. We've also, you know, we've basically allowed the supplier to use scale attendants in more meaningful work. They don't have to stand around just staring at a scale. We've also allowed the transportation company to leverage their, you know, their office clerk for more meaningful work, because they don't, you know, they don't have to transcribe hundreds of paper notes every day, and obviously deal with everything that comes with that. You know, lots of disputes, lots of, you know, challenges. Oh, it wasn't that much, it was this much, and so on and so forth. So it's you know, we've taken a very convoluted process and made it very simple. Likewise, you know, in a fuel delivery scenario, you typically, drivers have checklists when they go and drive a, you know, a tanker truck up to a gas station in order to put gasoline into the you know, into the underground tanks. And one of the things that that we've, you know, we've designed is a solution where actually you take that checklist, which is paper-based today fundamentally, and you put it on a obviously on the mobile device. The driver goes through, basically goes through all of their, you know, all of their points. And in order to give everyone more control, we use a wireless lock. It's a Bluetooth enabled lock that basically the driver goes through multiple points on the checklist, and they have to actually complete the first couple of steps before the lock automatically unlocks. The driver can now take it off and can connect the hose and fill the, you know, fill the underground tank. It's a simple solution. It doesn't cost a lot of money, but it gives you a tremendous amount of control, because now you are fundamentally making sure that the driver does everything that they do before they start fueling gas. Let's talk about, obviously, in you know, beyond the technological capabilities, which are exciting, but technology is never, you know, it's never useful unless you can save money with it, you know, and unless you can, you know, you can structure your processes to be more efficient and more effective. So where's the money? You know, if you spend $1 in order to save 95 cents, that's obviously not good. You want to have a very clear and well-cut business case. In our case, you know, implementing collaborative dashboards along with a very, you know, a very sophisticated, you know, highly granular data capture application, along with our ability to motivate drivers, along with our ability to, you know, to write everything to blockchain. We found here in one business case that a company, a Fortune 500, you know, multi-billion-dollar business, actually, you know, 1,000 loads per week, they actually saved more money just by avoiding 20% of all the drivers that are late than you know, than they spend on our solution. So as you saw early on, right, there's it's immensely expensive when you have to coordinate and when nobody knows what's really going on. So it in this business case, actually, we saw that, number one, you know, the savings for, you know, for the shipper, who's the only party who pays for the solution, far outweigh the cost of what, you know, a system such as Truckle costs. We've also seen, and this is not a surprise, of course, that the savings are correlated, right? Every party has, you know, similar savings simply because they have similar costs. When, you know, when I have 4 or 5 conversations going on in my company to figure out where the truck is, and then it hops to the next node in the supply chain, they have 4 or 5 conversations to know where the truck is. Naturally, you know, these costs will look similar. They're obviously on different levels. The carriers and the brokers do not save as much as dispatchers, 3PLs, and shippers do, but on the whole, on the whole, it's still a fundamentally a very attractive business case. We only charge, in our case, the party that sets up the transaction. To everyone else, this is free, which is another benefit because it brings entire supply chains together. It allows everybody to, to collaborate, and it gives them motivation to collaborate, right? You need to pay people to do something. You can't just, expect them to have a conversation and say, hey, we're all going to do the right thing here. You're in, right? That's not typically going to work. When you look at the business case from a slightly different perspective here, we call that the chief financial officer view. But ultimately, when you have collaboration across the supply chain, whether it's with our technology or a different one, doesn't matter. But and when you have meaningful contributions from the people that actually handle the execution in terms of the data, in terms of what they do. When you have the assurance from blockchain, and when you motivate people to do the right thing, then you ultimately get a much higher level of process control, which leads to fewer calls, fewer transactions that you manage as if they had exceptions, even though they would have run fine, fewer emails, fewer check calls, accountability is much higher, shared metrics, etc. Ultimately, all of this is process control. What leads to is a higher level of document integrity, which ultimately leads to far fewer exceptions, etc., and it leads to higher levels of customer service. And looking at this from a slightly different perspective, when you look at how people benefit across the supply chain, between the recipient, the shipper, 3PL and broker, to the carrier and driver, they all have different benefits. However, at the same time, the savings are highly correlated, as you had seen. And here, we see a 2 to 5x ROI in annual savings from just using our system. And obviously, there are many ways in which you can implement collaboration. Okay, in terms of the route optimization, the part that we do with OmniOpti, we obviously also see that now you have two sets of benefits, which is really interesting. On one hand, you have all the benefits that arise from using OmniOpti, fewer routes, cost reduction, less wait time per stop, all things that translate into real dollars very quickly. And of course, you have the savings from truckle in terms of fewer calls, exceptions, and so on. But when you bring it together, there's also synergistic effects, such as having shared dashboards now in different centers in, let's say across Europe, right? And that obviously is tremendously interesting, and it provides a business case that standard route optimization people cannot match, and it also provides a business case that standard supply chain visibility solution providers cannot match, right? So it's in our combination that we create something that's truly unique. Okay, allow me to finish with a couple of thoughts on innovation, and maybe to put a few tools on your belt, give you a few pointers for how to deal with a lot of the things that we've talked about, the changes that are about to come in supply chain, specifically for supply chain execution, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. So first of all, we all are very biased. Here we see, the chief engineer, British Post Office, Sir William Henry Preece. The Americans have need of the telephone, but we do not. We have plenty of messenger boys, right? And when we look at this today, obviously it's very easy to say, boy, that was stupid. The reality is, though, we all say things like this. We've all said things like this about Teslas, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. We've all probably said things like that about autonomous drives, artificial intelligence, machine learning, quantum computing, augmented reality, virtual reality, you name it, right? So we just, I think, at least from my perspective, my vantage point, we have to be careful not to overstate this, we always have to keep in mind that we all can be wrong. This is a guy who was born 50 years before the invention of the automobile. It is absolutely understandable that someone like that wouldn't immediately get the telephone, because you have to imagine the world in a completely new light. And frankly, none of us do it all the time. Another thing is, don't judge an invention or an innovation by its first iteration. What you see here, the year is 1954. This is the world's first mobile hard drive. This is actually, obviously, it came with a jet, and it actually came with its own forklift. And as you can see, it takes a couple of people to move it, just to unload it, right? And it is very, very, very difficult. But at the same time, when you look at this, you wouldn't necessarily get an Apple Watch. Right? And this box had about the storage capacity for one MP3 song in 1954. And it was one of the largest drives at the time. Right? But today, of course, we would laugh at that. We would say, what are you going to do with that? Right? But so we can't always judge something by the way it first looks. The same way we should look at autonomous vehicles, autonomous trucks, drones, you name it, right? They're going to change substantially, and what we're seeing today is just the first iteration of autonomous trucks, the first iteration of drones. We will see much more exciting ones. When specifically, when you evaluate supply chain technologies, and when you evaluate how to use technologies, I always found it very helpful to use a framework that was actually designed for inventors. It's by IDEO, the agency. It's a San Francisco-based agency that invented the mouse, the graphic user interface for initially Macintosh computers and so on. Arguably the best design company in the world, and they basically, when they talk about how do you make sense of an innovation, they say, well, you've got to take it through three filters. First of all, do you need it? Is it desirable? Do people want it? Do your people want it? Secondly, then, do you have a technology or do you have a business? If you can't make money off of it, if it's not viable, if your business case isn't there, then you have a great technology, but you don't have something that you can deploy, because we're not in the business of losing money. And then lastly, is it feasible? Does the technology actually make sense? Is it, can I build it? Can I build it in a form factor and in a way that it applies to the use cases that I'm targeting and things like that? So only when you cross all three of these barriers are you able to deploy something, should you deploy something. Another thing that's often overlooked is that technology is always at the end of the decision-making process. Technology in itself isn't valuable or warranted, for that matter. First of all, know your strategy. Why are you doing things the way you're doing them? Your strategy informs or defines your business processes, how you're doing things, the activities that you perform in your supply chain or in your company. Those processes employ technology. It's never the other way around. Never let anybody tell you that you should buy technology for technology's sake. That's dead wrong. And frankly, you could be wrong as often as you could be right. So it's important to keep that in mind. First, have a strategy, then define your processes, and then deploy the technology. Lastly, you need a culture that allows adoption of innovation. If you paint yourself into a corner, if you're afraid of change, you're never going to be an innovative company. When you look at the companies that today that were on the New York Stock Exchange in 1921, you can count them on one hand. Depending on how you count, you can count them on one finger. Companies come and go. The days where people will ask you, where your grandchildren will ask you, what was Facebook? Those days are coming, right? Who was Google? Apple? Did they build cars ever? Did they ever get around to building cars? Those days might come. We don't know. You know, if companies, you know, companies like that actually disrupt and you know, destroy their own legacies, they have a chance of survival. If they don't, they go up and they come down. It's really important to keep that in mind. You know, the formula here, OO plus NT equals EOO, means old organization plus new technology equals expensive old organization. That's really important to understand. If you don't have the culture to change, you will not be on the stock market in 100 years from now, I guarantee it. All right, good. With that, there's also a lot of vendors that are unsavory, can be unsavory. There's, you know, there's a lot of cows amongst the dolphins. You know, we saw that with blockchain in 2017, 2018, you know, initial coin offerings, things like that. We might see it again right now with special purpose acquisition companies, you know, vehicles that can bring substandard companies to the stock market in you know, in very quick and effective ways. We might see that as well. But there are always a lot of, you know, there are dolphins, no doubt about it, right? And there are good providers and bad providers. But make sure when you talk to your technology providers that you understand whether they're, you know, whether they're a dolphin or a cow. That's really important. Lastly, you know, keep your eye on the puck. You know, here, a quote from the great one, Wayne Gretzky, arguably the best hockey player who ever lived. It's you have to look ahead. Go to where the puck is going to be next. Don't look at where the puck is now. Don't, in other words, don't pave the cow path. Don't, you know, don't get to don't look at your current situation and then, you know, and then apply a technology. You're not going to get anywhere. Think out of the box. Think what your competitors might do, and think what's strategically the right thing to do. All right, great. With that, I'm going to stop my screen, and I'll jump to questions here. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you, Chris. I really did a lot. Very interesting, informative, but also intriguing and inspiring presentation, I must say. Wonderful. Okay, so also our guests, if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat, or maybe even unmute yourself and just ask what's on your mind, what you would like to learn about. Maybe I would have a few questions. So how do you, what would you suggest? What's the best way to somehow get rid of the silos? How to improve the operations? What's the first steps? What are the low-hanging fruits?
Yeah, I mean, the easiest step to possibly do is to leverage a system, you know, such as Truckle, which allows you to share data between people without the need for APIs and EDI. It guarantees that you can do so in seconds. It guarantees that, you know, that everybody works off of the same transaction. When you look at today's information systems, they were never built to share data. You know, it's actually, you know, it's 1972 all over again. You know, in 1972, a couple of IBMers, 3 at first, then 5, you know, talked to a company in Waldorf, Germany, and the company was saying, look, our marketing has an information system that's different from our transportation, that's different from our warehousing, that's different from finance, it's different from procurement and purchasing, that's different from manufacturing, and so on and so forth, right? They had all these silos of information systems inside of their company, right? And these consultants, of course, sit there and say, well, we're consultants building custom marketing systems and custom transportation systems. What you're telling us is that we're not doing our job, right? And they obviously had an epiphany and realized, well, we're really not doing our customers a favor. You know, when the customer's phone number changes, it probably needs to change in 8 different systems. But because they're all silos, the salespeople who called the customer, they get it. You know, They didn't reach anybody, so they called the operator. They got the new phone number. They put it into their system. But now when finance needs to call that customer, or transportation does, or warehousing does, they're out of luck, right? Because the data wasn't traveling with, with the process. So that's exactly the same situation we have now, only it's not inside of your four walls. It's between, different sets of four walls. You have to find ways to eliminate it, to counter it. Otherwise, it's going to be a problem. Especially when you look at how, Amazon and Walmart, for example, are pushing delivery times faster and faster and faster. Amazon now is talking about sub 30-minute deliveries. And Walmart is working on 30-minute deliveries. That's the new gold standard. It's 30 minutes between you pushing the button on the website and the stuff actually arriving at your door. And then you have gladiators out of Berlin, right, who are doing this thing in 10 minutes or less, right? Hyper-local warehouses in the apartment next door. When you push the button, they're going to take the cornflakes, just run them to your door, knock, and then vanish, right? And you just pick up your cornflakes and your toothpaste. It's especially with that, if you're not collaborating, you're going to be left behind. If you don't use optimization and advanced algorithms, such as what you guys offer, you're going to be left behind in a heartbeat. And there's this little tolerance for operators who aren't moving up with the standards.
Yes. Also, I heard in China, especially when the big shopping booms are, you can get things in 5-10 minutes because they already anticipate what's going to be sold and they have the stock in the van, so you get it in a couple of minutes. Yeah, and that's it.
Singles day. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. Okay, another question is who or which companies are the ones that can benefit from your offerings the most, or from your service the most? Yeah.
As you saw, everybody benefits really, right? And as you saw, when we combine your route optimization with our collaborative dashboards and visibility, then you get something quite unique. So today, what we do is we only charge the party that sets up a transaction. Everybody else gets it for free. It's a benefit basically. And yes, we've had conversations with users who basically said, help us to charge our supply chain partners for it, right? And that's entirely up to you. But fundamentally, we charge less than you would pay for a normal a low end GPS system. So there's no excuse for anybody not to use the Truckle system, and it's instantaneous, right? And it's easy to implement. You talk to your business partners, you talk to your 3PL and say, hey, we need to use this system, and off you go, right? We can often also OEM it. If a 3PL or manufacturer or a broker wants their logo on the mobile app and on the dashboard, we put their logo on there. That's not a problem. So things like that help a great deal. We find that generally the parties that are most likely to request our system today are manufacturers and third-party logistics providers. The brokers can as well. They often work similar to third-party logistics providers, identical to non-asset-based third-party logistics providers, with the exception that they often don't operate warehouses. But otherwise, as far as transportation is concerned, identical. But we don't see it as much from transportation companies. When we do, it's usually to enhance their competitive advantage. They want to really up the customer service that they provide to the next link over, and in Europe, right? That's mainly it, right? It's the cost savings are lower because you don't usually have brokers and dispatchers in the middle, but you do have really strong transportation companies that often have all these exceptions. So they have this disconnect to the driver. They often really resonate with, well, let's put the driver on the same level as everybody else. Let's give them more responsibility. They will not disappoint you, because the technology supports that responsibility and the control, and the actions drivers take. And so it's really, I would say, in many cases, the transporter, the 3PL, and the manufacturer.
What about the size of the companies? Is it more appropriate for smaller or bigger or mid-size?
It works anywhere, right? It's universally applicable. We find that on one hand, it's kind of it's a U-shaped curve, really. It's a normal distribution, as with everything in life. And you really, if you're too small, then it becomes really, really difficult. And we've had cases where companies were not sophisticated enough, for example, to educate their supply chain partners on what they were doing and why they were doing it. They just saw, oh, cool technology, let's use it, right? There was the strategy and the process was missing. So that can be an issue when you're too small. When you're too big, there's oftentimes, there's politics. There could be, on the technology side, not invented here. There could be people that have just advocated for, a large API-based solution, which costs millions and millions of dollars, as opposed to, what we would charge, and that would stake their career on something like that. They're not going to say yes ever over their dead body. And that's human, right? That's not something I would look down on, because it's simply human behavior. But anybody in the middle is a good good fit. We see that 3PLs typically are very interested, because they can use it as a company-wide system. We put their logo on it. It's their mobile app. It's their dashboard. Nobody needs to know that it's Truckle behind it, but they now provide capabilities that usually are far outweigh what they have today.
Perfect. Okay, so the last call for our guests. If you have any questions, let us know, and we'll try to provide you with a good answer. If not, so if you do, just go ahead. Maybe last questions or comments. Definitely, yeah. I see how much room for improvement there still is in logistics. So sometimes really it hurts you when you see how inefficient some operations are. And well, I really hope that you'll be able to contribute significantly to improvement of this global logistics, because well, the economy relies on that, and also the impact on the environment is huge. So we really need to do our best to improve and somehow transform ourselves, all of us, and make the most out of us and the most out of what we have.
Maybe one question from my side, if I can.
Go ahead.
What about gig economy? So we are talking here, as I understand, about this trucking business and big logistic freights that go from country to country. What about gig economy? Is this something that is also usable in this concept, or?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Thank you for asking. It's absolutely and directly applicable. The principle is applicable all around, right? Every time you have multiple parties doing the same thing and having the same goals, but not being connected directly, you have this issue. You could imagine a food delivery, right, where the driver takes the mobile app, and they already do, but they're not providing that data on the mobile app to for example, recipients of the package, right? And so to some degree, we're going to see more and more of that. We're going to probably see it in ride-hailing. We've had requests from manufacturers who want to use this because they see their own shop floor as a lot of different disparate silos, right? Nobody actually works with one another. And we've had a request from an ad agency which wants to produce movies, and they have lots of different parties that all have to come together to produce an advertising video. And they want the ability to store first cuts on there, and here are the proofs, here are the drawings, whatever. So this is applicable universally, more or less.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, last chance for anybody else interested in questions. So if not, then I guess we can wrap it up slowly. But it was really very interesting and fascinating, I must say. And I'm really looking forward to our future cooperation also. And well, also to everybody attending here, I wish you all the best. And if you have any further questions, maybe later on, just feel free to contact me or Chris. And I'm sure that we'll do our best to provide you with all the answers that you may need. Okay, so thank you very much. Thank you, Chris. Thank you to all the guests, and wishing you all the best. Take care.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.